My name is Jim and I work at a medical software company. I'm around people all the time and I don't really mind it, but when I come home at the end of a long week, sometimes I like to pack some food and put my headphones on, along with my hiking boots and a warm jacket, and just go for a nice long 2 or 3 hour hike in the woods. I'm lucky because I live in New Hampshire in an area with plenty of woods to go exploring in. Normally I hike in about an hour and then build a fire, sit down, and listen to some music, and if I bring my gear, cook some good food and just enjoy the peace and quiet and beautiful scenery. Usually this was about the extent of it, but about a year ago it was quite a different story. I also might as well tell you now that this is a totally 100% true story. I never told anyone because I didn't think anyone would believe me. It all started like this. It was around the end of September and I had a long week at work and hadn't been out in the woods for over a month. So when I came home Friday night after work, I had planned to go out for a hike the next morning. I got all my gear ready Friday night so that I could leave early the next morning. It was the beginning of fall, so it wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either, but bringing a warm jacket was a must. I got up the next morning and left about 7 a.m. It was a little overcast, but still nice out just the same. I started on my way into the woods and was just totally enjoying the whole experience as I always have. This time I had planned to hike in a direction of woods that I had never been to before and didn't really know. I just wanted to try something different. I've always had a good sense of direction and always have my compass on me, so I figured it wouldn't be a problem. It was such a nice peaceful area that I kept thinking to myself I'd just love to live out here and never leave. Eventually I looked down at my watch and noticed I had lost track of time and saw that I had been walking in for about a little over 2 hours. Usually I walk in about an hour and then turn around and start making my way back. I figured it was only about 12 o'clock noon, so I still had plenty of time. I set up a little area and made a small fire to cook up some food. My favorite was hot dogs and beans along with some salad I had put together back at my house. When I finished cooking, I sat down and was eating, and then all of a sudden got this really eerie, creepy feeling that someone was watching me. I didn't see anyone, but just had that feeling, and I had never felt this way before out here. The more I tried to forget it, the more obvious it became. After a while, I just decided it was probably time to get going because it was now around 2:30 and it was a good 2 to 2.5 hour walk back, and being the end of September, it started getting dark out earlier. As I was cleaning up, I heard some crackling of branches further back in the woods, so I stopped and looked up for a minute. I was getting the feeling more and more that someone or something was watching me. It was making me feel pretty uncomfortable. Once I had my things all together, I started back in the direction I came from. As I was walking back, now I felt like something was following me and I really couldn't shake it. I know it sounds crazy, but this is the vibe I was getting. After a while, I told myself that I was imagining it all. But instead of looking at the scenery and all the things I came out here to see in the first place, I was looking more at my surroundings and kept looking back behind me. Now let me tell you, I'm not a guy that scares easily or anything like that, but I literally had a really uneasy feeling and had no idea why. About 15 minutes into the walk back, I was walking down the middle of a gully type area, but it was fairly small. Each side was probably 6 to 8 feet high on my right and left. As I walked down the middle, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I couldn't really make out what it was because it was set back in the woods and behind the trees. I started thinking about it and wondered what would be out here this deep into the woods. The more I thought about it, the more I kind of started getting freaked out. I started walking a little bit faster and my breathing got heavier the faster I walked. I kept a close watch and then saw it again. This time it was a little more out in the open and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. At this point I knew I wasn't out here by myself, which scared the hell out of me. I had never seen anything like it before in my life, or at least not in person by myself out in the middle of the woods. I have a friend who's 6 feet 7 inches tall, and this thing made him look short. I don't know how tall it was, but like I said, it made my friend look short. It stood upright on 2 legs, I guess you could call them. They weren't legs as we know them, they were bent in the middle, but were a reverse bend or something from what I could tell. I know you're probably thinking I'm going to tell you that it was some kind of Bigfoot or something like that, but I've seen many pictures of what a Bigfoot might look like, and this thing didn't look anything like that. I kind of wish it was a Bigfoot because then I probably would have accepted it more, but I have never seen anything like this before. I was so scared that I was frozen in my tracks. As I went to slowly move forward, then it would slowly move towards me, so I'd stop and then it would stop. I'd wait a few seconds and then slowly try moving forward again, and then it would stop moving towards me again, but in an even more aggressive manner, so I stopped again. My heart was racing a mile a minute and I had no idea what to do. I was totally defenseless. I did know, however, that I wasn't going to outrun this thing. After about another minute or so, it started making this noise that was a low, deep growl, and I don't know why it all of a sudden started doing that. It did this about 2 or 3 times, and then after a few minutes, I found out pretty quickly why. I noticed that there were others starting to pop up all around me. At one point, I counted probably about 8 or 9 more of them. They were all along the top of each side of the ravine and stepping out behind trees and rocks. At this point, I pretty much knew that I was done for. Way out here in the middle of the woods and no one knows where I am, and all of these things have me surrounded. I didn't want to just start running because I didn't know if that would trigger them all to start chasing me. I didn't want to try fighting off just one of them, never mind 8 or 9. I started slowly walking forward again to see what would happen, which was the only thing I could do at this point. As I did this, they started slowly following me. They turned quiet and just observed as they followed me. My heart was beating out of my chest because I really didn't know what was going to happen here, other than the obvious. As I kept moving forward, I gradually started walking faster and faster, and then luckily they had started to back away and slow down. Once I was further ahead, I slowly looked back and they were just standing there watching me. Eventually, they all disappeared back into the woods and were gone. I still to this day thank God and have no idea how I got out of that situation, but I can guarantee you that I've never been so scared in my life. I don't really go into the woods anymore. When I was a kid, my grandfather had a cabin way out in the deep woods. My father used to bring me out there for the weekend, and the 3 of us would go hunting and camping, and it was one of the funnest times of life for me as a kid. It was quite a change from the normal everyday life that I was used to. Of course, that was years ago, and the cabin has since then been left to me. It's been in our family for years and years, and ever since I can remember. Now, this cabin wasn't one of those newly built with running water and electricity. It didn't have cable and all of the modern day amenities, and most of all, it wasn't set back into the woods only 100 yards. In order to get there, you had to drive 45 minutes into the woods and then park and walk another 10 minutes just to get to it. So when I say it's deep in the woods, I really mean it. It's a little bit of work, but once you get there, the peace and tranquility is very much worth it. I can appreciate even more now that I'm almost 60 years old. Well, anyways, I hadn't been out there in a long time, so I decided to make my way out there and take 2 or 3 days and just enjoy the time away. I made the drive and then hiked a little way through the woods, and once I got there, I was instantly reminded of all the good times I had from past years. I went inside and unpacked my things and got set up. After a day of unpacking and doing all the little things that come with staying out here, like gathering wood for a fire and preparing some food for dinner, etc., it started to get dark. Now, I do have to admit that once the sun goes down around here, it gets really dark, like pitch black. It also seems like all the noises of the woods are eerily magnified, and then on top of that, I have a really active imagination, which makes the whole thing pretty creepy. This is probably the only thing about the whole experience of being out here that I didn't really care for. It isn't like being in the city where when it gets dark, it never really gets pitch black. Plus, out here, there isn't another person around for miles. Normally, once it gets dark and the fire dies out, I usually go inside and light the fireplace and stay inside for the night. Now, I'm not saying I'm afraid to be out here or anything, otherwise I wouldn't come out here by myself and stay for 2 or 3 nights in the first place. Other than what I just mentioned, I truly do love it. I always bring my rifle for protection, but never really use it anymore. I used to do a little hunting, but these days I'm more interested in shooting pictures with my camera. I really like taking still shots of the scenery. You can't get any better nature shots than out here. So, the first night into my cabin getaway was good and there were no issues, but the second night was a different story. This is 100% true and may be the reason why I never come back out here. It all started like this. On the second night, I was getting ready for bed. It was about 11:15 and the fireplace was dying down. I made sure the door and windows were locked, just as I always do each night, and then went to bed. Once my head hit the pillow, I was out like a light. It was a pretty long day and I was tired. About 2:30 in the morning, I woke up and had to go to the bathroom. Now, remember, there's no bathroom in here. If you had to go, then you had to use the outhouse that was obviously outside and about 35 feet away from the cabin. Now, I don't know about you, but getting up in the middle of the night out of a nice warm bed to go outside into the cold air isn't my most favorite thing to do. And then on top of that, I had to go really bad. So, I bit the bullet and just got up and put my jacket on, opened the door, walked outside. I was only interested in getting this done and then getting back inside. Once I got to the outhouse, I closed the door and tended to my business. As I sat there, all I could think about is how freaking creepy this place is in the middle of the night when it's dark. Then all of a sudden, I heard footsteps. They were quiet at first, but then got louder and louder as they approached. I couldn't believe my ears. When you're out this far in the woods and you hear footsteps, it's usually not a good thing. I was trying not to make a sound so that I could hear where the footsteps were coming from, but also not to let anyone know I was in here if they meant harm. The steps sounded like they were a long stride, and also they sounded really heavy. Usually when a 200-pound man walks, you know what it sounds like, but these steps sounded like whatever it was a lot bigger and heavier. I was trying to look outside through the cracks between the wood planks but couldn't see anything. I was also trying really hard to be quiet. The steps got closer and closer and then stopped, and I swear it seemed like whatever it was standing right outside the outhouse. I didn't even have my rifle out here with me, and I was totally defenseless at this point. About 30 seconds went by, and then I heard a really deep but quiet growl, which again gave me the feeling that whatever it was really big. I think I stopped breathing for like a minute or two so as to not make any noise. Then it started walking again, but now it was going towards the cabin. I still couldn't see anything, but all I could think of is that I left the door of the cabin open. I could still hear it walking, and then I was finally able to see it through one of the cracks. Holy mother of God, it was standing upright on 2 feet and was all of 8 or 9 feet tall. The light from my lantern on the porch was glimmering off of it, so I could see that it was pretty hairy and had huge shoulders and arms. What the hell? My heart was beating a mile a minute. It went on the porch and looked in the window for a minute or so, and then started walking over towards the door. I was thinking to myself that this has to be a nightmare and kept praying to wake up. Once it got to the door, it literally had to bend down to look in. I was really hoping that it wouldn't go inside because I don't know what it would have done. After a few minutes, it started walking away from the cabin, but then started heading back over towards the outhouse again. Once it reached me and was right outside, it stopped again, and it's as if it could sense and knew that someone was inside there. I had the door locked, but this thing was so big that I know for a fact that it could have easily destroyed this little building, or at least knocked it over pretty easily. It started growling and grunting again, and then it hit the side of the outhouse. Easily at first, but then harder and harder, like 3 or 4 more times. All I could think about is what I was going to do if it broke the wood or ripped the door off. I guess the only thing I could do is run as fast as I possibly could for the cabin and grab my rifle. I still stayed as quiet as I possibly could, and then after 3 or 4 minutes of the most terrifying time of my life, it started walking away, and then eventually I couldn't hear it anymore. I literally stayed in that outhouse for the next 4 hours and didn't move a muscle until the sun came up in the morning. That's how terrified I was. I've been struggling with the idea of not going back there ever again, and it's been 2 years. I still to this day don't know what that thing was or what it would have done to me. It still bothers me just to think about it even now.